When we hear the words pilgrim and pilgrimage, it's likely that we immediately think of the ancient tradition of embarking on long and perilous journeys in search of miracles, healing, or some tangible confirmation of religious beliefs. In medieval times, pilgrimage was a common part of Christian practice. It's been continuous since not long after the death of Jesus Christ, right up to today. And the destination was very often one of the great cathedrals that by the 12th and 13th centuries were all over Western Europe and across Great Britain, established as the unmissable focal points of Christian communities and worship. Through the ages, cathedrals and pilgrimage have had a very close relationship, and it's a tradition that's enjoying a remarkable revival today, as people again feel compelled to take to the road in search of spiritual solace or reassurance. A pilgrimage can still, today, be a life-changing experience.
I'm David Suchet, and this beautifully preserved street is known as the Vicar's Close here at Wells Cathedral. The Close is the oldest residential street in Europe and has been home to the Vicar's Choral at Wells since the middle of the 14th century. It's a reminder that Britain's great cathedrals are at the very heart of the local community. Over the centuries, many thousands of pilgrims and visitors have been welcomed by cathedrals such as Wells, often on long and perilous journeys in search of miracles, healing, or some tangible confirmation of their religious beliefs. Welcome to the Pilgrim's Way to Britain's great cathedrals. In these programs, we're visiting many of the great cathedrals of England and Wales, exploring their long links to pilgrimage and how the highs and lows of history have shaped what we can see today.
I'm going to delve into the fascinating history of these remarkable buildings and the even more remarkable stories of the saints and bishops who were in many cases the original inspiration for both the journey and the destination. Along the way, I'll also be exploring some of the ancient pilgrim routes, and also a few of the newer ones which have been created specifically to cater for the increasing number of modern-day travellers. Many of these people begin their journeys simply as curious tourists, but their experiences along the way have proved compelling enough to make them pilgrims by their journey's end. In this programme, we're heading north, where our first stop is Ely Cathedral in Cambridgeshire. Sitting majestically amid the fens, it's been a welcome sight to many a weary traveller over the centuries. Rising like a ship out of the fens, Ely Cathedral excites wonderment from the moment it's first seen, not the least because it's been standing resolute on this watery site for 9 centuries. The sense of awe is continued inside, the vast length of the nave seeming to extend forever with its remarkable painted ceiling a reminder of the brighter church decorations that were once common. Ely invokes a sense of the impossible made possible, of leaving the ordinary behind to experience something quite special and spiritual. This is very much a place of faith and hope. Saints, shrines, and miracles were the impetus for pilgrimage during the Middle Ages, and these churches would have continuously thronged with excited visitors attracted by the wondrous stories of healing and rejuvenation. At Ely, the pilgrims came to visit the shrine of St. Etheldreda, the East Anglian princess who became England's first female saint, who founded both a monastery and a nunnery here in 673. Hers is a truly remarkable story. Believing her virginity represented her sanctity, she resisted consummating either of her two marriages. Her first husband gifted her the Isle of Ely, and after he died, she moved here to concentrate on her religious life and works. She was still only 19. However, politics intervened, and 5 years later, she was married to Egfrid, heir to the Northumbrian throne. That marriage lasted 12 years before Etheldreda was finally allowed to leave to join a convent. Then Egfrid changed his mind, and she was forced to take refuge at Ely, saved by the rising tide and the difficulties of pursuing her across the marshy fens. Etheldreda's life is depicted in a series of 8 carvings on the tower piers at Ely Cathedral, and you can also see her in a window over the west door. After her death in 679, a shrine was created by her sister, who succeeded her as abbess. Tales of her body still being complete in 695 and of miracle cures for blindness for anybody who touched the coffin resulted in Ely becoming an important centre of pilgrimage. Cathedrals were considered as vessels in which the faithful could journey safely to God. Indeed, the word nave comes from the Latin word for a ship, navis. Set on a small hill amid surrounding flatlands, it's visible for miles around. Ely Cathedral became known as the Ship of the Fens. The church that continues to dominate the skyline is Norman in origins, built between 1081 and 1089, and characteristically Romanesque in style, with soaring pillars and rounded arches. One of its true wonders is indeed its nave, with its long and uninterrupted views from west to east. This is an interior designed to inspire, its size and magnificence proclaiming the glory of God, as well as the wealth and power of its monastic community. In 1109, the new Diocese of Ely was created, and the abbey became a cathedral. Etheldreda's shrine had survived many upheavals, including the ransacking by the Vikings of the original church in 869, which was further evidence of its miraculous powers, and it continued to attract pilgrims in huge numbers. To cope with them all, the cathedral's east end was rebuilt and enlarged with a 6-bay presbytery in the early English Gothic style, which was dedicated in 1252. Along with Winchester and Glastonbury, thanks to pilgrimage, Ely became one of the 3 richest monasteries in England. In February 1322, disaster struck when the cathedral's Norman-era tower collapsed, a not uncommon occurrence as church designers challenged the structural technologies of the day. This also destroyed the tower crossing and 3 bays of the choir. It was, however, a chance to make a statement, and the replacement is quite literally Ely's crowning glory. To avoid a repeat, the new tower was given a wider base for greater stability and is octagonal in shape. It's topped by a lantern, which, as the name suggests, welcomes in an abundance of natural light. The lantern is built around a massive oak frame. Even today, the lantern is considered to be a marvel of engineering and construction, and it gives Ely an added sense of airiness and space. Built at the same time is the Lady Chapel, which was finished in 1349 and is a fine example of the decorated Gothic style of church architecture. It's the largest in any English cathedral, and when it was built, also the most elaborate in its decoration. Ely's is still impressive now, but just imagine it with stained glass windows and colourfully painted statues in all the niches. Considered particularly Roman Catholic in practice, no Lady Chapel survived the Reformation unscathed, and some were completely destroyed. Others, such as here at Ely, were stripped of all their ornamentation and decoration, including the stained glass. Today, the chapel's centerpiece is a very contemporary statue of Mary, which was added in the year 2000, depicting her joyously celebrating the news that she is to be the mother of Jesus the Saviour. No English or Welsh cathedral, or indeed most smaller churches, survived the English Reformation without some desecration or damage. Henry VIII's split with the Church of Rome had much wider ramifications than merely facilitating his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Monastic communities were closed down and their cathedrals stripped of shrines, statues, windows, murals, and memorials. What couldn't be removed was destroyed. Often within a matter of days, the cathedrals were rededicated to the new Church of England and the bishops replaced by a dean and chapter. But much worse was to come around a century later with the English Civil Wars and an even more puritanical approach to reforming the church. Ely Cathedral was perhaps fortunate that Oliver Cromwell lived in the town for 10 years, from 1636, and in 1643 he was appointed governor of the Isle of Ely. He ordered that services cease and the church be closed, but later demands from Parliament that it be completely demolished came to nothing. It's highly likely that Cromwell played a role here, and while Ely's chapter house and cloisters were pulled down, the main building was still standing resolute and undamaged at the restoration of the English monarchy in 1660. Like many English cathedrals, for Ely, the 17th and 18th centuries were a time of decline and decay. In 1813, it was described as being in a state of disgraceful irrepair and disfigurement. The Victorian era saw a revival of interest in the restoration and preservation of the great cathedrals, and during this time, Ely was remodeled and refurbished, which included returning stained glass to the main windows and adding a stunning painted ceiling to the nave. The work of two artists, the nave ceiling comprises 12 panels which tell the story of the ancestry of Jesus, beginning with Adam. It was completed in 1864 and gives some idea of just how colourful cathedral interiors would have been before the austerity of the Reformation. In monastic times, there would have been a whole complex of other buildings surrounding a cathedral, including a bishop's residence, kitchens and living quarters for the monks. A great deal of this infrastructure was destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries, as was the case at Peterborough. Around 25 miles to the northwest of Ely Cathedral is Peterborough's great church, which became a very popular destination for pilgrims in the Middle Ages, thanks to a severed arm and 2 phials of blood. Peterborough's original abbey gave rise to the town that grew up around it, and today's cathedral is now firmly anchored in the midst of the more recent urban expansions of the 1960s, a reminder that its primary role is to serve its community. Within Peterborough is a Norman-era gem, impressive in both its size and solidity, but also down-to-earth in its purity and simplicity. It feels accessible and comfortable, a place to spend time out from the hustle and bustle that's not far away, and connect with more spiritual things. Originally founded in 655 by the first Christian monarch of the Mercia era, King Peter, Peterborough subsequently became a Benedictine monastery which was destroyed in 870 by the Vikings. It was re-established in the 10th century, and the new church was consecrated in 972. However, it lacked one of the vital ingredients of a medieval monastic community: holy relics. Then, around the year 1000, a monk called Brother Weingut brought the severed arm of St. Oswald here. It had miraculously remained perfectly preserved, since Oswald, one of the early Christian English kings, was killed in battle in 642. This was a major league holy relic, and considered so valuable that it was placed under 24-hour guard. When the current Norman-era church was built in the early 12th century, a special watchtower was installed in the St. Oswald Chapel next to the shrine. The arm disappeared when the shrine was dismantled during the Reformation, never to be seen again. But the monk's 24-hour watchtower is still in place. The new Norman Cathedral of Peterborough took 120 years to complete, and it boasts some glorious design features, not the least being its huge nave, which is 203 feet in length and 36 foot wide. The nave's wooden ceiling is the oldest surviving example in Britain, dating from 1250. However, it was repainted in the 18th and 19th centuries. The cathedral's majestic west frontage is dramatically early English Gothic in style. These massive pointed arches are the giveaway. But it's actually a facade simply built onto the front of the Norman building to make for a grander entrance. Completed in 1237, the portico's decorations include 33 statues representing the patron saints of the cathedral and other key figures in its history. It was built after Peterborough acquired some even more high-powered holy relics guaranteed to significantly boost pilgrim numbers. Abbot Benedict had been present at the murder of Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, and 7 years later, in 1177, he brought to Peterborough 2 phials of the martyr's blood, his shirt, and a flagstone from the site of the slaying, later said to have been stolen at night. Pilgrims could drink a glass of water containing a tiny drop of Becket's blood, and the considerable funds this practice generated paid for the completion of Peterborough Cathedral, including the building of the Becket Chapel. Peterborough is unusual for having survived the English Reformation largely unscathed, and was rewarded with cathedral status in 1541, after the new Diocese of Peterborough was created. A likely reason for the upgrade is that Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, and the woman at the centre of his bitter dispute with Rome, is buried here. As it happens, another queen was once buried here too. After Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed in 1587, she was interred at Peterborough Cathedral, but the body was later transferred to Westminster Abbey by her son James I. The former burial site is simply marked in the south aisle of the presbytery.
I think Peterborough Cathedral gives us an indication of how people used cathedrals in the Middle Ages. They didn't go there for big services like we go. They went to seek salvation. That big, ginormous three-arched entrance, it's a bit like a Roman triumphal arch. It draws you in to this holy space. Inside, the iconography would all be about seeking salvation, where the most exquisite pieces of medieval craftsmanship were there to try to create heaven on earth.
Although left in ruins after the English Reformation, enough of Peterborough's cloisters remain to provide an idea of what monastic life would have been like when the community was flourishing. Here, there was a dormitory, a washing area, and even a geriatric wing called a Miséricorde, where elderly and ailing monks were looked after in their final years. We've been using a number of terms to describe the key parts of a cathedral, so let's take a moment to explain what they refer to. All cathedrals have a cruciform layout, an acknowledgement of the cross of Christ. They're nearly always orientated east to west, with a high altar in the eastern end, and so it's the first to be greeted by the rising sun, and it also faces the holy city of Jerusalem. The western part of the building, usually the longest, is the nave, and at its far end is the main entrance. At Ely, and also at both Lincoln and Durham, it's reached via a long porch known as a Galilee porch. The name is symbolic of Christ rising up from the region of Galilee. The arms of the cruciform layout are called the transepts, logically north and south, while the middle space is called the crossing, which usually supports a central tower. The crossing often contains the choir, literally the choir stalls and the organ. The eastern part of a cathedral is considered the holiest and contains the presbytery, the high altar, a retrochoir, and a selection of chapels, nearly always including a lady chapel, as we've seen here at Ely, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Situated close to the altar is the bishop's throne or cathedra, from which comes the word cathedral. The retrochoir is always behind the high altar and can be used for different purposes, perhaps once to house a shrine, but more likely today used as a chapel or a second choir area. Lincoln Cathedral is a perfect example of this arrangement. Depending on the design, the nave and transepts may have additional spaces to either side, which are known as aisles. Small chapels can be dotted everywhere within the cathedral's interior. Winchester Cathedral, for example, has a total of 22. Durham is a fine example of how chapels were colourful and decorated. Immediately outside the cathedral was built the chapter house for holding church and community meetings. It was connected to the main building by cloisters, which typically form a quadrangle with a garden planted in the middle called a garth. This was both decorative and provided a quiet place for meditation and prayer. There's a particularly fine example of this arrangement at Gloucester Cathedral. Cloisters are generally located on the southern side of the cathedral as it's warmer, but there are exceptions, such as at Gloucester, where they're on the north. Truly stunning, though, are Gloucester's 14th century cloisters. Not just for the fact that they came through the Reformation and civil wars without damage, but because they boast the earliest and arguably finest fan vaulting in the country. The ceiling in the eastern walk is the earliest surviving fan vaulting in Britain. The original 14th century washing area used by the monks, the lavatorium, has also been preserved and was supplied with water by a local stream. Fans of the early Harry Potter films will very likely recognise Gloucester's cloisters as they starred as the corridors of the Hogwarts School for Wizards. Another miraculous survivor from medieval times is the cathedral's great east window, and the word great doesn't really do it justice. It's simply huge, and when installed, was designed to be as much educational and inspirational. It showed the visitor, more likely than not illiterate, the way the world worked in the 14th century, with an ascending hierarchy, from the nobility, royalty, and clergy, up to the martyrs, saints, and angels, topped by Jesus Christ. Like any of England's great cathedrals, Gloucester is full of the tombs and monuments commemorating the great and the good. But it also continues to serve a living and breathing community, as it has done for 1,000 years.
So as well as being a place of worship and of holiness, people see it as part of their daily lives. And for us, that makes it a really special place. We speak of it as sacred space and common ground.
Lincoln Cathedral stands tall, not only above the surrounding city buildings, but in the wider Lincolnshire landscape, serving as a potent symbol to all of both its earthly and heavenly dimensions. Both outside and in, Lincoln is a testimony to the marvels of human achievement, but also endures as a testimony to humanity's relationship with God. The impressive frontage of Peterborough's Cathedral was most likely inspired by Lincoln Cathedral's even more awe-inducing west entrance. It's mostly Norman, Romanesque in style, and it's all that was left standing after a devastating earthquake in 1185. The challenging task of rebuilding went to the newly appointed Bishop of Lincoln, Hugh of Avalon, who was a French Carthusian monk said to be as eccentric as he was energetic. He was, however, up to the challenge of rebuilding a ruined cathedral and even joined his labourers on the job. Sadly, Hugh didn't live to see the fruits of his labours completed, but after his death in 1200, he certainly went on contributing to the building effort, as his canonization in 1220 and the stories of miracles at his shrine ensured a steady stream of pilgrims. So many, in fact, that the eastern end of the cathedral had to be enlarged with a new retro choir built to accommodate St. Hugh's shrine. Today, this is called the Angel Choir, because of the host of sculptured angels, which tell the story of life, death, and salvation. Of course, the shrine of St. Hugh was destroyed during the Reformation, but the base for his head shrine can still be seen. It was a common practice to create secondary shrines, which were often portable, so they could be carried in processions, or placed so that more pilgrims could gain access. Imagine this space and other parts of the cathedral absolutely thronged with eager, jostling pilgrims seeking miracles. They would be trying to get as close as possible to the shrines, as touching the coffin or the shrouds would be how the favor was bestowed. They would remain here day and night, waiting, kneeling, and continually praying. The miracles would be recorded by a clerk, and the extravagantly bejeweled shrine would be under constant guard. The thanks offerings from grateful pilgrims helped finance a number of big building projects at Lincoln. Firstly, the raising of the central tower to its current height, completed in 1311, and then the raising of the two western towers. The addition of wooden spires made the cathedral the tallest building in Europe, a crown it held until 1548, when the central spire blew down. It was never replaced, and the western spires were later removed as well. However, perched on a small hill, Lincoln Cathedral continues to literally tower over its surroundings and is clearly visible from miles around. For the record, it's the third largest cathedral in England. St. Hugh can be seen perched atop one of the pinnacles on the west frontage, and on the other side is the swineherd of Stowe. Such was Hugh's rapport with his community that the poor pig-keeper gave his entire life savings to help with the building of the new cathedral. In return for such a generous contribution, Hugh promised, "One day you will be raised up to my height." And so it came to pass. On the inside, much of Hugh's vision for a splendid and vast early Gothic interior has survived into the 21st century, even though the cathedral was extensively damaged by the Puritans during the English Civil Wars. The St. Hugh's choir and the east transept were completed before Hugh died and are just as how he would have known them. The spacious choir is, if you like, a church within a church. Today, it's the beating heart of the cathedral where choral services are regularly held. The east window here is a remarkable 57 feet in height and remains the biggest 8-light church window anywhere in England. Also noticeable is Hugh's crazy vault roof, so named because the ribbing is asymmetrical and has no regular pattern. The vastness of the nave was always meant to impress, and it still does today, especially on the rare occasions when the seats are removed. Traditionally, the nave was mostly used for processions and where the medieval pilgrims would have stood. The idea of a seated congregation is a comparatively recent one.
This place here, this cathedral, is a place that you can step across the threshold. It's a thin space between heaven and earth, and you can encounter God here. You can discover something of his love, steadfastness, and care for you.
York Minster embraces nearly 2,000 years of history, but it also embraces the present with its many services, activities, and community events, and the daily welcoming of visitors into its bright and warm embrace. It's been called a testament in stone. Its architectural splendor intended to inspire both wonderment and devotion. It's impossible not to be moved by all the grandeur, while at the same time marveling at how well it succeeds in creating a vision of heaven on earth. Like Lincoln's Cathedral, York Minster was never a monastic church. In fact, as it was staffed by clergy and not monks, it was called a minster by the Saxons, although its status and function was the same as those of a cathedral. Pilgrims started coming to York Minster almost from the earliest days of established Christianity in England. The first church on the site was a modest wooden structure. Built in 627, especially for the baptism of the converted pagan King Edwin, it was a very significant moment in history. Today, York Minster is the second most important church in the Anglican Communion, after Canterbury Cathedral. Physically, though, it's England's largest Gothic-style church and has the largest chapter house in the country. York's story is one of constant rebuilding and expansion, largely driven in medieval times by the desire to outdo Canterbury for size and grandeur. The original wooden building gave way to a more substantial stone one, which in turn was replaced by a much bigger Norman-era minster after the conquests in the 1060s. Glorifying God and the Norman victory were the objectives here. What remains of this building can be seen in the undercroft below the present church, and it's in here that you can still see all the phases of the building's history, over 900 years of work. Even after a huge eastern end was added in 1170, the giant main pillars now form the western crypt, York still wasn't deemed grand enough, and in 1220 a massive programme of rebuilding was begun. It would take 250 years to complete, but the result is a triumph, utilising all that was possible architecturally at the time, and then more. The nave is the biggest medieval hall in England and is so wide it had to be vaulted in timber rather than stone. Such a huge and towering space, uncluttered because it was primarily designed for processions, would have drawn all eyes heavenwards. Indeed, at the door stands a statue of St. Peter holding the key to the kingdom of heaven. Equally awe-inspiring are York's many and splendid windows, and it's quite remarkable how much original coloured glass has survived. The Great West Window is from the 14th century, and the Five Sisters window in the north transept is even older, completed in 1250. It employs a type of glass called grisaille, which is predominantly grey with points of colour. At 53 feet in height, this is the largest surviving grisaille window in the world, but it isn't the largest window in York Minster. That title is held by the Great East Window, which was created between 1405 and 1408. It contains 117 panels and tells the story of the creation, along with events in the Old Testament and dramatic depictions from the Book of Revelations. It's so large, it required an additional stone supporting screen. The last time it was cleaned, the job took 10 years. While York Minster was spared any significant damage during the English Reformation and simply continued on, under new ownership as it were, it hasn't been so fortunate when it comes to fires. One, in 1829, destroyed most of the wooden interior features, and then in 1840 another burned through the wooden nave roof and the southwest tower. Then, in July 1984, the south transept was gutted, and it was a miracle this fire didn't spread to the rest of the cathedral.
This is a building that is the product of centuries. It's not something that was just put up and that's that. It was built over 400 years, And it's been, if you like, nursemaided ever since, one way or another, to give us the building that we're in today.
York Minster's chapter house is the more common octagonal shape, but is unusual in not having a central column internally to support its vaulted roof. Instead, the roof is wooden rather than stone and suspended from the exterior dome. The number 8 is symbolic in church design. The 8 sides of an octagonal chapter house, standard for 8 days, the 8th day representing the time beyond earthly time, which is set at 7 days. It was a reminder of this being a place where we enter the time of eternity. Apart from its sheer size, it's notable for its 7 wonderful windows, the intricate carved stone canopies atop the seating benches, and its painted ceiling panels. At one time, the whole interior would have been this colourful.
We have musical input of a high standard from our choir and a service of great beauty. And I think this draws people in, warms their hearts in a way, and they catch a glimpse of something beyond themselves, something bigger than themselves. And it's our challenge then to make that link between that and God and his love for them.
Durham Cathedral may look a bit severe on the outside. It's been described as part church, part fortress. But it's a wondrous expression of both power and glory on the inside. It could be so easy to feel small and insignificant in such a large-scale space. But there's more a sense of belonging amid the reassuringly solid pillars and the arching vaults. Durham is a story of steadfastness, sureness, and spirituality. These 3 attributes also represent the story of the saintly Cuthbert, whose exemplary life still has relevance today, as much expressed in the magnificence of this building as in the simplicity of his shrine, a place for quiet reflection and meditation. It's because of Cuthbert that Durham Cathedral has been inextricably linked with pilgrimage. The original church on this site was specifically established to house the tomb of one of the early English church's most important and revered saints. Cuthbert was already revered for his kindness and humility even before he died, and many miracles were attributed to him when he was still alive. 10 years after he died, it was reported that his body had defied decay and was still completely intact. St. Cuthbert was destined to be a very big drawcard for pilgrims, but it would be quite some time before he finally arrived at Durham. For around 200 years, Cuthbert's shrine was on Lindisfarne, a tiny island just off the coast of Northumberland, where he was bishop of a monastic community established by St. Aidan in 635. During the 9th and 10th centuries, the east coast of England was under constant threat from Viking raiders, and the monks eventually decided to leave and look for a safer location, taking Cuthbert's coffin with them. It was a very long search, lasting nearly 100 years. Eventually, a prime site was selected high on a rocky outcrop overlooking the River Wear. A new monastic settlement was started in the year 995 and is the origin of today's city of Durham. The first task was to build a church to house Cuthbert's much-travelled shrine, and this building was completed in 1017. Nothing remains of the Anglo-Saxon building that was known as the White Church. As happened all over England after the Norman conquests, this monastery was dissolved and a new Benedictine order established with the commission to build a church as magnificent as anything in France. Again, too, this great church was to make a statement about the might and power of England's new rulers. The foundation stone was laid in August 1093, and the cathedral was substantially finished within 40 years. More importantly, it's not been significantly altered or remodeled since, so it's very much a Norman-era building in the classic Romanesque style, especially inside. In fact, it's considered such a fine example, it's a listed World Heritage Site. The three-tiered nave is designed to emphasize both length and height. The characteristic and elegantly rounded arches are supported by huge drum piers, which feature various geometric patterns. Originally, these would have been filled with metal and colored, which would have greatly added to the visual impact. The nave's rib-vaulted ceiling was the first in Europe to be constructed in stone, a courageous decision for the time and also an expensive one. It features the earliest examples of pointed arches, designed for strength, and it's supported by flying buttresses concealed in the aisle roofs, another innovation that would not be copied anywhere else for another 50 years. On the floor, near the west entrance, is a line of black marble, which was the marker beyond which women could not pass. The rest of this strictly male-only Benedictine community was off-limits. This meant only the beautiful Galilee Chapel was available to women for prayer and meditation. Durham Cathedral exudes resolute solidity, both inside and out, partially a result of the Norman-era building techniques, and partially because it was designed to make an unambiguous power statement, especially to the Scots just to the north. It's no mistake that Durham looks part cathedral and part fortress. The exterior isn't quite so purely Norman as the interior. The two western towers are 12th century, but the imposing central tower, which rises 216 feet or 65 meters, was added in the late 15th century and is distinctly perpendicular Gothic in style. It hasn't detracted from the cathedral's visual impressiveness, though. The American author Bill Bryson has described it as the finest building on planet Earth. I don't know of any place, he states, that is more glorious to be in, more delightful to behold, more fitting to the spirits. Durham Cathedral has left a lasting impression on visitors, worshippers, and those who serve here.
Durham is an astonishing place. I've served in, this is my 4th cathedral now, and each of them have wonderful characteristics, but Durham really is unique.
St. Cuthbert is still very much a presence in Durham Cathedral, not the least because his remains are still here, buried beneath a simple marble slab behind the high altar, the very same spot as the original shrine. That Cuthbert's relics have survived to this day is as much a miracle as the seeming incorruptibility of his body. When his shrine was originally installed in 1104, Durham Cathedral became the leading pilgrim destination in England and the wealthiest. It was only eclipsed by Canterbury after the martyrdom of Thomas Becket. With the dissolution of the monasteries, Cuthbert's shrine was dismantled, and the king's commissioners decided to take a look in the coffin, no doubt looking for more treasures to loot. The story has it that to their total astonishment, they found not dry bones and dust, but a complete body in priestly vestments described as being fresh, safe, and not consumed. The body was reinterred and left undisturbed until 1827, when it was reopened and a number of relics recovered, including Cuthbert's stole, his pectoral cross, and an ivory comb. These items, known as the treasures of St. Cuthbert, are on display in the 14th century Great Kitchen, itself something of a miracle, as it's one of only 2 medieval monastic kitchens to have survived. And here are wonderfully preserved fragments from St. Cuthbert's wooden coffin, which was originally made for him in 698, 11 years after his death. When it was first discovered, his body hadn't decomposed. Here, then, is a very tangible link with the era of saints and shrines prior to the English Reformation. The cathedral was at the heart of the medieval monastic community, but they were surrounded by the many other buildings which were needed to look after the monks' earthly needs. Many of these were destroyed during the Reformation, but in addition to its wonderful 14th century kitchen, Durham also has the only surviving monastic dormitory from the same period. It's a truly vast space, which gives some idea of just how many men lived here. Durham has another important connection with St. Cuthbert. Buried in the Galilee Chapel is the Venerable Bede, who died in 735. Bede was an English Benedictine monk, who was also a scholar, theologian, historian, and author. Bede never met Cuthbert, but his manuscript titled The Life of St. Cuthbert, which he wrote in both verse and prose around 721, tells us just about everything that we know about the saint today, and was certainly instrumental in spreading the news of his miracles early on. Remarkably too, Bede's remains have also survived to this day. Brought to Durham in 1020, moved to the Galilee Chapel in 1370, lost after the Reformation, and then rediscovered in 1831. In 2005, St. Cuthbert was reinstated in the legal dedication of Durham Cathedral, having been removed during the Reformation. It's recognition of Cuthbert's revered place in the history of Christianity in Britain. Thanks to Bede, we know that Cuthbert was an early convert to Christianity in 651, when he was 18, and later moved to Lindisfarne, which was quickly becoming a centre for Christian learning and outreach, earning it the title of Holy Island. Cuthbert became the prior of Lindisfarne in 665, and according to Bede, was having visions, healing the sick, and even changing the weather. His reputation was soon attracting pilgrims to the island. Cuthbert died in 687, and with many more tales of miracles taking place at his tomb, even more pilgrims started flocking to visit his shrine. Then, as now, many would have made the trip on foot, crossing the sands from the mainland at low tide. This is now the final leg of a pilgrim trail called the St. Cuthbert's Way. The trek across the sands, when you really are following in the footsteps of saints, takes around 2 hours, and timing is everything to avoid being caught by the incoming tide. Marker poles were added in 1860 to help guide walkers, and a causeway was built in 1954, but it too is fully submerged at high tide and necessitated the installation of a refuge box. Nothing of the earliest churches on Lindisfarne remain, but a later monastery was founded in 1093 on the same site by the first Norman Bishop of Durham, William of St. Calais, to re-establish a link between the cathedral's monastic community, St. Cuthbert, and Holy Island. Although this church is now in ruins, it's still possible to appreciate that it was once a substantial building, and pilgrims continued coming to Lindisfarne right up to the Reformation. The site is a potent reminder of one of the most significant characters in the history of Christianity. One who's influenced perhaps millions of lives and continues to do so, both here and at Durham's sturdy cathedral. If God does indeed work through men, it is writ compellingly large in these places.
In the final episode of The Pilgrim's Way to Britain's great cathedrals, I'm going to be heading west. First to the border county to visit Worcester and Hereford, then into Wales, to finish this pilgrimage at the windswept coastal site St. David selected for his 7th century monastery. David is such an important saint in the history of Christianity. The pilgrimage to his cathedral ranked only behind Rome and Jerusalem. I hope you'll join me to find out why. I'm David Suchet, and for now, goodbye.